Hello and welcome to today's video on the power of vulnerability in building stronger relationships. In this video, we'll explore the concept of vulnerability, its impact on relationships, and how you can use vulnerability to strengthen your relationships. One approach to defining vulnerability is to describe it as the willingness to be emotionally exposed and authentic in our interactions with others. This means that we're open and honest about our thoughts, feelings, and experiences, even when it may be uncomfortable or difficult to do so. Vulnerability also involves being willing to show our imperfections, flaws, and weaknesses. By revealing our true selves in this way, we create a space for trust, intimacy, and connection in our relationships. It's also important to note that vulnerability is not the same thing as weakness. Vulnerability actually requires a great deal of strength and courage. It takes strength to be open and honest with others, to reveal our true selves, and to risk rejection or judgment. In fact, vulnerability can actually be seen as a sign of strength, as it requires us to confront our fears and be willing to take risks in our relationships. Another important characteristic of vulnerability is authenticity. When we're vulnerable, we're showing up as our true selves, without pretense or masks. This can be challenging in a world where we're often expected to put on a brave face and hide our true feelings. However, when we're able to be authentic and vulnerable with others, we create a deeper level of connection and trust. In summary, vulnerability is about being willing to expose ourselves emotionally, to show our imperfections and weaknesses, and to be authentic and true to ourselves. It's a sign of strength and courage, and it creates a space for trust, intimacy, and connection in our relationships. The impact of vulnerability on relationships. One important aspect of vulnerability is that it can create a deeper level of understanding and empathy between people. When we're willing to be open and honest with others about our thoughts, feelings, and experiences, we create a space for them to do the same. This can lead to a greater understanding of one another, which can help to strengthen our relationships. Vulnerability can also help to build trust and respect in our relationships. When we're willing to be open and honest with others, even about difficult or sensitive topics, it shows that we trust them and value their opinion. This can create a sense of respect and mutual admiration between people, which can help to deepen the connection and make the relationship more meaningful. Another important benefit of vulnerability is that it can help to resolve conflicts and improve communication in our relationships. When we're willing to be vulnerable and share our true feelings and needs, we create a space for constructive dialogue and problem solving. This can help to avoid misunderstandings and disagreements, and can ultimately lead to a more harmonious relationship. On the other hand, avoiding vulnerability can have negative consequences for our relationships. If we're not willing to be open and honest with others, it can create a sense of distance and mistrust. It can also make it difficult to resolve conflicts or communicate effectively, which can lead to more significant problems down the road. In summary, vulnerability can have a significant positive impact on our relationships. It can lead to a deeper level of understanding, build trust and respect, and improve communication and problem solving. By being willing to show our true selves and be vulnerable with others, we can create more fulfilling and meaningful connections with those around us. Overcoming the fear of vulnerability. Fear of vulnerability can stem from a variety of sources. For some people, it may be a fear of rejection or abandonment. They may worry that if they reveal their true selves, others will judge or reject them. For others, it may be a fear of appearing weak or vulnerable, which can be perceived as a sign of inadequacy. In some cases, it may be a fear of intimacy itself, as vulnerability often involves a high level of emotional intimacy with another person. To overcome the fear of vulnerability, it's important to recognize and acknowledge the fear. It's natural to feel some discomfort or anxiety when exposing ourselves emotionally to others, but it's important to remember that vulnerability is a sign of strength and courage, not weakness. It takes courage to be open and honest with others, even when it may be uncomfortable or difficult. Another strategy for overcoming the fear of vulnerability is to practice gradually exposing ourselves to others. This can involve starting with small disclosures and gradually building up to more significant ones. By doing this, we can build our confidence in our ability to handle the vulnerability, and also build trust with the other person. It's also essential to develop self-compassion and self-care practices to help us manage the discomfort that may arise from vulnerability. This can involve recognizing that vulnerability is a natural part of the human experience, and that it's okay to feel uncomfortable or anxious when being vulnerable. Finally, it's important to surround ourselves with supportive and understanding people who encourage vulnerability in their relationships. By having a network of people who value openness and authenticity, we can feel more comfortable being vulnerable and creating deeper connections with others. In summary, fear is a significant obstacle to vulnerability in relationships. It's important to acknowledge and understand the source of the fear and develop strategies for overcoming it, such as gradually exposing ourselves to others and building a supportive network of people who value vulnerability. By doing so, we can cultivate more fulfilling and meaningful relationships with those around us. Tips for cultivating vulnerability in relationships. One key tip for cultivating vulnerability in relationships is to practice active listening. This involves being fully present and engaged when another person is speaking and making an effort to understand their perspective without judgment. By doing so, we create a space for the other person to share their thoughts and feelings, and we can respond in a way that shows we value their vulnerability. Another important tip is to practice empathy and compassion. When we put ourselves in another person's shoes and try to understand their experiences, we can create a greater sense of connection and understanding. This can involve actively asking questions and seeking to understand their perspective, as well as expressing empathy for their emotions and experiences. It's also important to practice self-awareness and self-reflection. This can involve taking time to understand our own emotions, needs, and desires, and then sharing that information with others in a vulnerable way. By being honest about our own experiences, we create a space for others to do the same, and we can create a deeper sense of connection and understanding in our relationships. Another key tip for cultivating vulnerability is to practice trust-building behaviors. This can involve being reliable and consistent in our interactions with others, following through on commitments, and respecting their boundaries and needs. By doing so, we build trust with others and create a space where vulnerability feels safe and secure. Finally, it's important to create a culture of vulnerability in our relationships. This can involve expressing appreciation for vulnerability and valuing it as an essential aspect of our relationships. By doing so, we create a safe and supportive space where vulnerability can flourish, and we can build deeper and more fulfilling connections with those around us. In summary, there are many practical tips and strategies for cultivating vulnerability in relationships. By practicing active listening, empathy, self-awareness, trust-building behaviors, and creating a culture of vulnerability, we can build deeper and more fulfilling connections with those around us. These practices can help us create more meaningful and fulfilling relationships in all areas of our lives. To conclude the video on the power of vulnerability in building stronger relationships, it's important to reiterate the main message: that vulnerability is a critical component of deep and meaningful connections with others. By being open and honest about our thoughts, feelings, and experiences, we create a space for others to do the same, and we can build deeper levels of trust, intimacy, and understanding in our relationships. Throughout the video, we explored several key topics related to vulnerability in relationships, including defining vulnerability, the impact of vulnerability on relationships, overcoming the fear of vulnerability, and tips for cultivating vulnerability in relationships. We learned that vulnerability is not a weakness but a strength, and that it takes courage to be open and honest with others. We also explored strategies for overcoming the fear of vulnerability, such as gradually exposing ourselves to others, developing self-compassion and self-care practices, and building a supportive network of people who value vulnerability. We also provided practical tips for cultivating vulnerability in relationships, such as practicing active listening, empathy, self-awareness, trust-building behaviors, and creating a culture of vulnerability. By doing so, we can create a safe and supportive space where vulnerability can flourish, and we can build deeper and more fulfilling connections with those around us. In conclusion, vulnerability is a powerful tool for building stronger relationships. By embracing vulnerability and practicing strategies for cultivating it in our relationships, we can create deeper and more meaningful connections with those around us. We hope that this video has been informative and helpful, and that it inspires you to embrace vulnerability in your relationships and cultivate more fulfilling and meaningful connections with those around you.